Have you ever met someone who changed your life without even trying? What if a struggling single dad, quietly fixing cars in a snow-covered town, turned out to be the very person who would heal a broken stranger, and in doing so, finally heal himself? This is a story about second chances, quiet generosity, and the kind of love that doesn't arrive with grand gestures, but with hot cocoa, small kindnesses, and the courage to stay. Before we begin, if you believe in the power of heartfelt stories that uplift, inspire, and linger long after the last word, consider subscribing. We share stories just like this one, made for the heart and soul. Now, settle in, take a deep breath, and let me tell you the story of the struggling single dad who helped a lost traveler and changed her life forever. Struggling single. Dad helped a lost traveler. She had no idea he was the billionaire who changed her life. The morning sky above Harbor Creek was streaked with amber and grey, as though the sun itself was unsure whether to show its face. A gentle chill rode in on the October wind, brushing against the aging wooden storefronts of Main Street and rustling the golden leaves that had begun to carpet the sidewalks. Ben Harper stood outside his modest auto repair shop. Harper's Fix-It, a weathered red toolbox resting by his feet, with a worn cloth slung over one shoulder and a mug of lukewarm black coffee in hand. He studied the garage's crooked front door. A storm the night before had warped the hinges, and now the door creaked open just enough to let in too much wind and not enough warmth. He sighed, set the coffee down, and picked up a screwdriver. It was just another thing to fix, another thing that wasn't falling apart fast enough to panic over, but not working well enough to leave alone. He understood that feeling. Inside, his 10-year-old son, Owen Newton, sat cross-legged on the floor, building something precarious with Legos while munching on a piece of toast. The shop wasn't much, a few rusty tool racks, a space heater that coughed more than it warmed, and a calendar that still showed September, but it was theirs. Ever. Since Ben left Chicago behind 3 years ago, Harbor Creek had been their quiet refuge. Small town, big sky. No expectations. No one here knew who he really was. To the locals, Ben Harper was just the guy who fixed things, cars, bikes, old snowblowers. They didn't know about the billions he walked away from or the boardrooms he once commanded. They didn't know about Evelyn either, his wife, gone too soon, her absence still a tender bruise beneath his ribs. The sound of tires crunching gravel pulled Ben from his thoughts. A silver sedan had stopped awkwardly across the street, steam rising from under the hood. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out, clutching a tattered leather satchel. Her hair was windswept, her coat too light for the weather, and she looked up and down the street like someone trying to remember which way was north. Ben watched her a moment longer than he meant to. There was something about the way she stood, still almost brittle, as if a stronger wind might carry her away. "Dad?" Owen's voice came from behind him. "That lady's car is smoking." Ben blinked. "Yeah," he murmured. "I see." At that, he grabbed his coat and walked across the street. The woman looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from confusion to cautious relief. "Car trouble?" Ben asked, already crouching beside the front fender. "I think it overheated," she replied. Her voice was soft but tired, like it hadn't been used much lately. "Car trouble?" Ben asked, already crouching beside the front fender. "I think it overheated," she replied. Her voice was soft but tired, like it hadn't been used much lately. He popped the hood and was met with a cloud of steam. "Looks like a blown hose. You're lucky it didn't go on the highway." "I was supposed to be on the highway," she muttered, then caught herself. "Sorry. That sounded ungrateful. I'm just lost." Ben smiled gently. "You're in Harbor Creek. Small town, but not a bad place to be lost in." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. That's what the bus driver said. You're not from around here. No, she said. I'm between places, I guess. Ben glanced at the car, then back at her. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her hands trembled slightly. Come across the street, he offered. I've got a heater and coffee. I can take a better look once the engine cools down. She hesitated, not out of fear. Ben had learned to recognize fear, but from something else. Weariness, perhaps. The kind that came from carrying too many invisible things for too long. I'm Ben, he said, extending a hand, and that's my shop. I live out back with my son. You're safe here. The woman studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'm Ellie Monroe. Inside the garage, the scent of engine oil mixed with something warmer, fresh toast and cinnamon, courtesy of Owen's breakfast experiments. Ellie looked around, surprised to see a makeshift bookshelf tucked beside the workbench and a framed photograph of a woman smiling beneath a cascade of autumn leaves. Ben poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Ellie. Cream or sugar? Black is fine, she said, wrapping her hands around the mug like it was the first warmth she'd felt in days. Owen peeked around the corner. Hi, he said. You're the lost traveler? Ellie blinked, then smiled. I suppose I am. Owen nodded like that made perfect sense. We get those sometimes. One guy ended up here looking for Portland, in Maine. Ellie laughed. The sound surprised even her. Ben watched her quietly. It had been a long time since he saw someone laugh. Like that, not out of politeness, but because something inside had cracked open just a little. Your car can stay here overnight, Ben said. I'll order the part first thing in the morning. If you don't have a place to stay, I'll find something, she said quickly. But then her eyes met his, and some part of her defenses softened. There's a room out back, Ben added gently. It's warm. It has a lock on the door. You'd be welcome. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, but meaningful. Finally, Ellie nodded. And just like that, something shifted in the quiet heart of Harbor Creek. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to begin. Ellie Monroe awoke to the scent of cedar and motor oil. For a fleeting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was low, paneled in dark wood, and a wool blanket lay heavy across her legs. Then it returned, the stalled car, the kind-eyed mechanic, the little boy with an old soul. Harbor Creek. She sat up slowly in the twin bed, her bones protesting the cold morning air. The room Ben had offered was simple but clean. Wooden dresser, patchwork quilt, a small lamp that still glowed faintly from the night before. There was a sense of intentional quiet here, the kind of stillness that feels like healing if you let it. On the nightstand sat a steaming mug of tea and a handwritten note. Figured you might want a warm start. I'm out back with the boy. Come by when you're ready. Ben. She read it twice. Ellie couldn't remember the last time someone had left her tea, or a note, or anything, really. The garage was already alive with the low rumble of a classic engine. Ben stood under the hood of a pickup truck, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms dusted with grease. Owen sat nearby on an upside-down bucket, munching a banana and offering unsolicited advice. Dad, you should show her the Mustang. Ben chuckled. Not yet, bud. Ellie approached slowly, unsure where the boundaries were in this unexpected kindness. Ben looked up. Morning, he said, his voice even. Didn't want to wake you. You looked like you needed rest. I did, Ellie admitted. I think I forgot what real rest felt like. He gave her a half smile, then reached for a towel and wiped his hands. Your car's still cooling off. I ordered the part. Should be here tomorrow if the roads stay. Clear? She nodded, clutching the tea in both hands. Thank you, I mean it. You hungry? Owen chimed in. Dad makes weird pancakes, but they're not poison. Ellie laughed, a warm sound that surprised her again. I'd love that, she said. In the tiny kitchen behind the garage, the 3 of them ate pancakes that were, in fact, slightly odd, shaped like stars and dinosaurs, and one that looked suspiciously like Abraham Lincoln. The syrup was real maple, the butter soft. Ellie hadn't felt this grounded in months. They talked about little things, weather, the best sledding hill in town, the annual chili cook-off that apparently had been a serious source of controversy last winter. But under it all, there was something unspoken, the shared weight of things not said. After breakfast, Owen grabbed his coat and announced he was going to the library. Ben nodded, trusting, and Ellie watched him go, marveling at the gentle rhythm between father and son. Ben poured them both more coffee. "You can stay longer," he said quietly. "If you need—" Ellie looked at him, startled. "Why would you—" "I mean, you don't know me." Ben leaned against the counter. "I don't need to know everything. To see someone who's tired. I've been that tired." Ellie's throat tightened. "I was married," Ben added after a moment. "Her name was Evelyn. Cancer took her. Owen was 7. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, not in sadness, but in acknowledgement. Some losses don't ever leave you. You just carry them differently over time. She looked down at her cup. "I lost everything last year. Job, partner, apartment. I thought I was building something permanent, but turns out I was just handing bricks to someone else's future." Ben didn't rush her. The silence stretched, but it was comfortable. "So I left," Ellie continued. "Packed my car, told myself I'd head west, but I didn't even make it halfway across Michigan before the car gave up. Story of my life, really." Ben smiled gently. "Maybe it gave up in the right place." She looked up, her eyes brimming. "Why are you being so kind?" He took a breath, considered his answer. "Because kindness saved me," he said. "Not all at once, but slowly. A neighbor who shoveled our driveway that first winter. A woman at the diner who always slipped an extra muffin into Owen's bag. None of them fixed everything, but they reminded me I wasn't invisible." Ellie blinked, the words settling in her chest like warm stones. She wasn't used to this. Honesty without agenda. Care without price tags. "Besides," Ben added with a wry grin, "you make a good audience for Owen's weird pancakes." She laughed again, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. For the first time in a long time, Ellie didn't feel like a problem to be solved. She felt welcomed. Later that day, while Ben worked on a tractor engine in the back, Ellie wandered into town. Harbor Creek was the kind of place where strangers still waved, where dogs sat unleashed on porches, and the bakery smelled like cinnamon at all hours. She stopped at a little bookshop with a "Help Wanted" sign taped to the inside of the window. Her fingers hovered on the door handle. Not yet, she thought, but maybe soon. She returned to the garage at sunset, the sky burning gold above the lake. Ben looked up from the workbench. "How was town?" "Small, kind, honest," she said. "Sounds about right." She hesitated, then added softly, "I might stay a few more days, if that's still okay." Ben didn't answer right away. He simply nodded and said, "We've got room." By the end of her 3rd day in Harbor Creek, Ellie had begun to breathe more deeply. Not in the literal sense, though the clean, pine-laced air helped, but in that intangible, soul-deep way that follows a long season of emotional drought. She still didn't know how long she would stay, but for the first time in months, she wasn't in a rush to leave. The town had a rhythm of its own, slow, patient, unbothered by the world outside. The people she passed greeted her not as an outsider, but as someone already known. The barista at Good Gracie's cafe called her Hon by the 2nd day. The woman at the library offered her a coat someone had left behind just in case the cold finds you unprepared. And Ben didn't hover, didn't prod, didn't make conversation unless it came naturally, but his presence was a constant, quiet, steady, like the hum of the garage's old heater. Somehow, it made her feel more stable just knowing he was there. That evening, a storm brewed over the lake. The clouds rolled in low and grey, dusting the horizon with soft snow. Inside the garage, Owen was on the floor with a box of Legos and a mission to build the biggest truck the world has ever seen. Ellie sat nearby, flipping through a book she'd borrowed from the library, a collection of Mary Oliver poems that Ben had nodded approvingly toward. "You like poems?" Owen asked, glancing up. Ellie smiled. "I do. My mom used to write them," he said casually, like it was a fact about the weather. "She kept them in a notebook with flowers on the cover." Ellie blinked. "That's beautiful." She said poems were like little secrets you tell to paper, Owen continued. "Dad keeps the notebook on a shelf, but he doesn't open it much. I think it still makes his heart hurt." Ellie looked over to the far end of the garage, where a small bookshelf stood beneath a dusty window. A few framed photos, a couple of well-worn paperbacks, and yes, a faded notebook with pressed daisies on the cover. She felt the air shift inside her chest, so much grief folded neatly and tucked behind ordinary things. "Your dad loves your mom a lot," Ellie said softly. Owen shrugged, but his voice turned quiet. "Sometimes I think he's still waiting for her." Later that night, after Owen had gone to bed, Ben and Ellie found themselves in the kitchen, the kettle humming between them. Outside, snowflakes drifted down like whispers. Ben stirred honey into his tea. "Owen mentioned you two talked about Evelyn." Ellie hesitated. "Only a little. He brought her up." Ben nodded slowly. "She was the kind of person who made everyone feel like the room got warmer when she walked in. I used to think I'd never find peace again after she died. Then I realized I didn't need to replace her. I just had to carry her forward somehow." Ellie studied his profile in the low kitchen light, the quiet strength in his jaw, the gentleness in the way he spoke of sorrow. "I think you're doing that," she said. "With Owen, with this place." He gave a soft laugh. "I'm mostly making it up as I go. Aren't we all?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. Ben looked at her then, really looked, not just with concern, but with understanding. "You carry something too," he said gently. She swallowed hard. "I do." He didn't press. He just waited. "I was engaged," Ellie said at last. "He was charming, smart, knew how to make people say yes. We worked together at a marketing firm. He told me we were building a life. And we were, just not one that included me." Ben's eyes didn't flinch. "He betrayed you." Ellie nodded. "He used my name to secure investors, then shut me out of the company before the ink dried. Took the office, the team, even the apartment. We'd bought it in his name. Did he face consequences? No. He's too smooth for that. I didn't fight. I was too shocked, too ashamed. I just disappeared." Ben was quiet for a moment. "There's no shame in walking away from something that breaks your spirit." She wiped a tear with the heel of her hand. "I didn't think I was this fragile." "You're not," he said simply. "You're still here." That simple statement undid her more than all the sympathy she'd been offered in the past year. The next morning, Ellie stepped out into a world blanketed in white. The snowfall had quieted the town, softening every edge, every sound. It felt like a fresh canvas. At breakfast, Owen handed her a small card. It was hand-drawn, with a crooked heart and a stick figure with long hair. "It's for you," he said. "I made it last night because you're kind." Ellie blinked back emotion as she ran her fingers over the card. "Thank you," she whispered. Ben watched her from across the table, something unreadable in his expression. Kindness, Ellie realized, came in many forms, some spoken, some drawn in crayon. That night, as the fireplace crackled in the small living room, Ben took down the notebook with daisies on the cover and handed it to Ellie. "She would have liked you," he said. Ellie opened the book and began to read. "Let your heart break if it must. That's how the light gets in." She closed the notebook and looked up at Ben, her eyes shining. "I think maybe I'm starting to understand that." It began with a tray of cinnamon rolls. Ellie had wandered into Gracie's cafe that morning for a quiet cup of coffee and a moment to herself. but instead found herself holding a warm metal tray lined with parchment paper and sugar glaze being directed, somewhat forcefully, toward the old white church at the end of Main Street. Harbor Creek's harvest bake sale is tomorrow. Gracie, a sprightly woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an apron that read Queen of Rolls, explained. And since you're staying with Ben Harper, that practically makes you one of us, Ellie hadn't argued. There was something oddly comforting in being drafted into something so small-town and wholesome, something normal, something human. The church's kitchen was buzzing when she arrived. A few women were elbow-deep in flour, and the air smelled like nutmeg, vanilla, and childhood. Someone handed her an apron and a mixing spoon like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You're the one staying behind the garage?" asked a woman named Marie, peering over her bifocals. Ellie nodded. Marie gave a knowing smile. "Ben doesn't offer that room to just anyone." Ellie glanced down at the dough she was kneading. "He's been very kind. That man has a quiet way of helping people," Marie said. "Never wants credit. He just shows up when folks need him. Been that way since Evelyn passed." Ellie felt a stir of something unspoken in her chest. Ben didn't speak much about his past, but here in this kitchen it was clear he was woven into the fabric of this place, in flour, in silence, in the spaces people didn't talk about, but still felt. Later that afternoon, Ellie walked home with a plate of reject rolls wrapped in foil, the kind that didn't make the bake sale cut, but tasted like perfection all the same. As she turned the corner to the garage, she noticed a boy around Owen's age struggling to fix a bicycle chain near the curb. His gloves were too big, and frustration was written all over his face. She approached gently. "Need a hand?" The boy looked up, guarded. "It's fine." Ellie crouched beside him. "Chains are tricky, especially when you're cold and mad." He didn't say anything, but he didn't stop her either. With a few tugs and a twist of her wrist, the chain clicked into place. The boy stared at the bike. "How do you know how to do that?" "I used to ride everywhere as a kid," she said. "Didn't have a car until college. You're not from here. Is it that obvious?" The boy shrugged. "People here don't fix things for other people unless they're a family," Ellie smiled. "Maybe that should change." He didn't respond, but as he pedaled away, she noticed he looked back once before turning the corner. That evening, after Owen had gone to bed and the wind howled softly outside, Ellie found Ben in the garage, working under the hood of an old Chevy. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching the way he moved, methodical, quiet, comfortable in the company of machines. "Gracie conscripted me into the bake sale," she said. Ben chuckled, not looking up. "You've officially been baptized into small-town life. They said you help a lot of people around here." He wiped his hands with a rag, then finally turned to face her. "Not really. That's not what Marie said. Or the boy I helped fix a bike for today." Ben leaned back against the workbench. "I just do what I can." "But why?" she asked, genuinely curious. "What keeps you here?" He was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly. "After Evelyn passed, I didn't want to be anywhere. I was angry at everything, her doctors, myself, even Owen sometimes. I left Chicago because I couldn't breathe there anymore. I thought I was running, but Harbor Creek didn't let me hide. People here didn't ask questions. They just handed me tools, gave me space." He glanced toward the back room where Owen slept. And Owen needed normal. He needed snowball fights and neighbors who remembered his birthday, not a dad still chasing money to fill the silence. Ellie took a step closer. "And now," Ben met her gaze, "now I fix things. It's not much, but sometimes people just need one thing to work when everything else doesn't." Ellie's heart softened. "That's more than not much, Ben." He looked at her for a long beat, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or trust. Later that night, alone in her room, Ellie opened her journal. For months it had been blank, pages meant for goals she'd never reached, letters to herself she never finished. But now she wrote, "Today I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because I earned it, not because I proved anything, but because someone saw me and said, 'Stay.'" She didn't know how long she'd stay in Harbor Creek, but she no longer saw herself as a traveler. For the first time in a long time, she saw herself as a person with a place to return to. Snow had settled on Harbor Creek like a soft, forgiving blanket, the kind that muted the noise of the world and made everything, even broken things, look beautiful for a while. Ellie stood by the window in the garage kitchen, a cup of cocoa in her hand. Outside, Owen was trudging through the snow with a bright red sled in tow, bundled in layers so thick he looked like a walking pillow. He paused near a maple tree, squinting up toward the branches like he expected magic to fall from them. "He does that every year," Ben said, stepping up beside her. "Swears one of those trees is going to drop a snowflake shaped like a star." Ellie smiled. "He believes in things." Ben nodded. "He does. More than I do, most days." There was a pause between them, not uncomfortable, just full of things. Not yet spoken. "I think I'd like to go with him," Ellie said suddenly. Ben raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Sledding with a 10-year-old in deep snow is not for the faint of heart." She gave him a mock glare. "Are you calling me old?" "I'm calling you unprepared," he said, chuckling. 10 minutes later, Ellie found herself on the slope just behind the community center, cheeks stinging from the cold, and heart unexpectedly light. Owen launched down the hill with reckless joy, a streak of red and laughter. "Your turn!" he called from the bottom, waving. Ellie took a breath, settled onto the sled, and shoved off. The world blurred around her, snow, sky, wind, and she screamed, half in terror, half in delight. She landed in a puff of powder beside Owen, who was grinning from ear to ear. "You scream like a city person," he said proudly. "Because I am one," she laughed, gasping for air. They trudged back up together, and on the third run, they lay on their backs in the snow, catching their breath. Owen was the one who broke the silence. "Do you miss your family?" he asked. Ellie turned to look at him. The question caught her off guard, not because it was too forward, but because it was asked without judgment, just curiosity. "I miss what I thought I had," she answered honestly. "But I think I miss who I was before it all fell apart. Even more." He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. Children often knew more about broken things than adults admitted. "Did you love him?" "Yes," she whispered. "But I think he only loved the version of me that was useful to him." Owen was quiet, then said, "You're useful here too, but not in that way." Ellie blinked. "What way then?" "You make Dad smile," he said simply, "and you listen, like really listen, not like teachers, not even like some grown-ups." She didn't answer right away. Her throat was tight. "Can I ask something else?" he added. "Of course. If you could live anywhere, anywhere in the whole world, where would it be?" The question struck something deep. For so long, Ellie had chased places that promised success. City skylines, high-rise offices, hotel lounges with expensive lighting. She had always been chasing, always proving. But now, lying in the snow beside a boy who asked questions like a philosopher and believed in star-shaped snowflakes, the answer came quietly. "Somewhere I don't feel like I have to be anything other than myself." Owen turned to look at her. "That's here?" She looked back at him, startled. "Don't you see it?" he asked. "You're different here, happier." That night, Ellie tucked the moment into her memory like a photograph. She didn't know what it meant, or what she was ready to admit, but it was true. She was different here. Later, as she helped Ben wash dishes, she told him what Owen had asked. He paused with a wet plate in his hand. "That's his favorite question. He asks everyone who stays long enough. Why? He used to ask Evelyn that before she got too sick," Ben said softly. She always said the same thing. Anywhere Owen is. Ellie swallowed hard. He's been trying to find her answer in other people ever since, Ben added. Ellie dried a dish, then placed it down gently. I think he might have found it again. Ben looked at her, not with surprise, but with something quieter. Gratitude, maybe, or hope. Later that evening, Owen curled up in the armchair beside the fireplace with a blanket and a book. Ellie watched him from across the room, the firelight dancing on his face. She remembered the way her fiancé used to speak about children, with polite detachment, like they were something to avoid or schedule around. He never wanted kids. Too messy, he said. Too much noise. But here was a boy who asked questions that made you think about your whole life. And she found herself thankful for the noise. She opened her journal and wrote, "Love is not always found in grand moments. Sometimes it's in the quiet questions of a child, the kind that show you what still lives inside your heart." The town of Harbor Creek was aglow with twinkle lights and pine garlands. It was the first Friday of December, the night of the annual Tea Festival of Light. And Main Street looked like something from a snow globe. Cozy, magical, timeless. Ellie stood at the edge of the square, wrapped in a borrowed wool coat, and watching as children weaved between booths selling hot cocoa and handmade ornaments. Music floated in the air, an old man playing fiddle, a choir of high schoolers humming. Silent night. Laughter echoed off the buildings, like a memory you didn't know you'd missed. She had never experienced anything like it, not even as a child. Her winters had been filled with artificial trees and forced smiles. Her adult holidays had been mostly networking events wrapped in faux sentiment and overpriced wine. But this was real. Pretty great, huh? Ben appeared beside her, holding 2 paper cups of cider, steam curling from the rims. "It's magic," Ellie said, smiling as she took the cup. "Like someone bottled joy and let it loose in the streets." He chuckled. "Don't tell Gracie that. She'll start selling it in jars." They sipped in silence, watching Owen run toward the fire pit with a group of kids, his cheeks pink from the cold, eyes alight. "You've given him something beautiful," Ellie said softly. Ben didn't look at her. "He gives me more." As the evening unfolded, Ellie wandered between booths, stopping to admire handmade scarves and jars of jam. Then her eye caught something pinned to a corkboard by the church steps. A flyer listing donations made toward restoring the town's youth center, a small building by the lake that had nearly shut down the previous winter. She read through the names: families, small businesses, a local Rotary Club, and then, at the bottom, in fine print, "Special thanks to BH Foundation, anonymous donation." Her hand froze on the paper. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd seen that name before, years ago on a donor list for an arts education program in Chicago, and once, discreetly, on an internal spreadsheet during her time at Monroe. And Blake, the firm she had helped build before it was taken from her. Back then, she'd assumed it stood for a faceless trust fund. No one ever talked about who it belonged to. But now, standing here in Harbor Creek, sipping cider beside Ben Harper, her thoughts couldn't help but wonder. Could it be him? She turned to look at him. He was crouched down by Owen, helping tie a shoelace, laughing at something the boy had said. He looked so natural, so grounded, so utterly not like a man who would have millions tucked into quiet philanthropic arms. But kindness, she had come to learn, didn't always look like a grand gesture. Sometimes it looked like a man who stayed up late fixing broken snowblowers. For free, a man who offered strangers warm rooms, no questions asked, a man who brought light without needing to stand in it. Later that night, back at the garage, Ellie stirred the fire while Ben made tea in the kitchen. Her mind spun. She didn't want it to be true. Or maybe she did. She wasn't sure. "Hey," Ben said, entering with 2 mugs. "You okay? You've gone quiet," She took the cup from him, nodding. Just full. You know, one of those days where the heart feels too small for everything. He smiled at that. Yeah, I know those. She studied his face. There was no trace of performance in him, no arrogance, no sign that he ever belonged to the world of backlit boardrooms and glossy portfolios. But what if that was the point? Can I ask you something? She said suddenly. Sure, if someone gave a lot of money to this town, quietly, wouldn't people talk about it? Ben leaned back in the armchair. They might, or they might not, if the person didn't want attention. But wouldn't you be curious? He looked into the fire for a long moment before answering. I think if someone gives because they want to be seen, that's one thing. But if they give because they remember what it was like to need, and they want no one to feel that again, that's something else. His words hit her like a quiet thunderclap. Why do you ask? He added gently. She hesitated. I just saw a name. One I'd seen before, and it made me wonder. Ben didn't press. That night in her room, Ellie opened her journal. Her handwriting was steady, but her thoughts were anything but. There's a man here who fits too well into the cracks of this town. He fixes what breaks and says little, but I think he's built more than I see. And I don't know whether I want to be right or wrong. She closed the book and looked toward the bookshelf where Evelyn's notebook still rested. A light snow had begun to fall outside again, and somewhere deep inside her, a new thought took root. What if the most powerful people in the world weren't the ones who shouted the loudest, but the ones who whispered hope into places that needed it most? The air in Harbour Creek had turned sharper, tinged with that peculiar stillness that came right before the snow. Ellie stood by the window of the garage kitchen, staring out at the skeletal trees lining the back road. The world was settling into winter's silence, but inside her a different storm was brewing. She couldn't stop thinking about the initials. BH Foundation. She had seen them again that morning, this time on a bulletin board at the local library, pinned beside a thank-you note for new children's books and a set of laptops donated to the after-school program. Courtesy of BH Foundation, quietly present, deeply appreciated, and next to it, taped haphazardly, was a scanned page of an old article about anonymous donors saving struggling rural towns, one of them being Harbour Creek. Ellie stared at the words until they blurred. She didn't want to believe it, not because she doubted Ben's goodness, but because she couldn't reconcile this man, who fixed busted trucks and made weird pancakes, with the man who might command vast sums of money behind the scenes. Could a man be both? That night, after Owen had gone to bed, Ellie found herself seated at the small kitchen table with Ben. He was drying dishes, humming quietly to himself. There was something so natural about him in that moment, wholly present, unpretentious, but her mind was no longer quiet. Ben, she said, careful not to sound too abrupt, can I ask you something personal? He paused mid-dry, turned to her. Sure. What did you do before you came to Harbour Creek? He didn't answer right away. His fingers worked slowly over the dishcloth. Finance, he said finally. In Chicago. Her heart stuttered. What kind of finance? Private. Capital, venture backing, startups mostly. He said it without flinching, like stating the weather. Too much stress. Not enough meaning. Ellie's fingers tightened around her mug. And then, you left it all? Ben nodded. After Evelyn passed, I didn't want that world anymore. It felt loud and hollow. Owen needed quiet. And so, did I? She swallowed. But did you leave everything behind? All of it? He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes were tired, but not guarded. Some things are harder to leave than others. Like a foundation, she asked carefully. Silence filled the room. Heavy, sharp, Ben set the towel down. "I think you already know the answer," he said. Ellie's throat dried. "I suspected, but I didn't want to believe it." "Why not?" "Because it changes everything." Ben sat down across from her. "Does it?" She struggled to find the words. "I came here broken, and you, this place, you made me feel like I was enough again, like I didn't have to prove myself to belong. But if you're that man, the one who helped fund half this town, then I'm not sure what's real anymore." Ben didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend. He simply met her pain with quiet honesty. "I didn't want to lead with money. I've seen what it does. It rewrites how people look at you, how they measure themselves around you. I needed a life that wasn't built on what I owned, but who I was when everything else was stripped away." Ellie blinked hard, willing the tears not to fall. "But you didn't tell me." "I didn't lie to you." "No," she said, her voice cracking. "But you didn't trust me with the truth either." Ben leaned back, his face unreadable. "Would it have made a difference, Ellie?" She stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor. "Yes, it would have, because I've spent the last year trying to rebuild my life without shortcuts, without illusions. And now, I'm afraid I fell into another version of the same thing, someone who gets to decide how much truth I deserve." The words hung between them like frost. Ben's expression didn't change, but something inside him seemed to pull back, as if bracing for the chill. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you." Ellie turned, barely whispering. "But you did." She packed that night, not all of it, just enough, a few clothes, the journal, the picture Owen had drawn. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay, not like this, not until she could sort out what was real and what wasn't. As she zipped her bag, a knock came at the door. It was Owen. "Are you leaving?" he asked, his voice too small for his age. She crouched down. "Just for a while." "Because of my dad?" "No," she said, though the lie stung. "Because I need to think." Owen looked at her with wide, searching eyes. "I liked when you were here. You made the quiet less lonely." Ellie hugged him tightly, burying her face in his scarf. "You made me feel like I belonged." He stepped back and handed her something, a small piece of paper, folded twice. "I wrote this for school, but I want you to have it." She nodded, unable to speak. Then she walked out into the snow. In the car, with the heater running and her hands shaking on the wheel, Ellie unfolded the note. "If I could live anywhere in the world, I'd live where people love you enough to tell the truth, even when it's hard." The motel was clean, quiet, and impersonal, exactly what Ellie thought she needed. It sat just off a rural highway, flanked by a gas station and a frozen field of corn stubble. Her room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old carpet. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted like ash under a flickering street lamp. She sat on the edge of the bed, her small duffel still zipped, untouched. A local news station murmured from the television she hadn't meant to turn on. There was nothing about the room that reminded her of Harbor Creek, and yet everything inside her did. The firelit quiet of the garage, the warmth of Owen's questions, the way Ben handed her coffee with two hands, like the gesture itself mattered, the way he looked at her, not with expectation, but with presence, and the truth she wasn't ready for. She had told herself leaving was about space, clarity, but the silence wasn't helping. It only amplified the ache. She hadn't expected to miss them this fast. The knock came just before noon the next day. A man in a brown parka stood at her door, holding a small padded envelope. "Delivery for Ellie Monroe?" he asked. She blinked. "I didn't order anything." He shrugged. "It's got your name, prepaid." She took the envelope, thanked him, and closed the door. Inside was a letter, written in a child's uneven scrawl on lined school paper. Her heart caught in her throat. Before she even opened it, "Dear Miss Ellie, I hope you're okay. Dad says sometimes people need space to think. I don't know much about that, but I know I miss your pancakes and your stories and how you always listen when people talk, like it matters. Most grown-ups don't do that. I think my dad is sad. He won't say it. He just fixes things more than usual. He even fixed a toaster that wasn't broken. That means he's really sad. I wrote this poem for school, but now I think it's really for you." She paused, pressing a hand to her chest. "When someone goes away, the room stays full of smells and sounds and space they pulled. I used to think gone meant nothing left, but now I know it means quiet theft. I hope you come back, not for always, just for now. Because some hearts feel better when they hear somehow." Ellie covered her mouth. Tears blurred the ink. She hadn't just walked away from Harbor Creek. She had walked away from being seen, from being needed, from something that, though unexpected, had begun to matter far more than she realized. That evening, she took a walk through the nearest park. The path was quiet, lined with leafless trees and empty benches. Her boots crunched the snow, and in the growing dusk she sat beneath a lamppost, clutching Owen's letter in gloved hands. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who thrived on certainty, strategy, and control. The woman who planned her days down to the hour, who knew what wine to pair with what contract negotiation. That version of her would have shredded a handwritten letter and scoffed at poetry. But that woman had broken, and maybe what she needed now wasn't armor, but honesty. She opened her journal and wrote for the first time in days, "I'm scared to go back, but I'm more afraid of what I'll miss if I don't. I didn't know what home felt like until it wasn't mine to walk into anymore. I'm not ready to say forever, but maybe I'm ready to say, not yet goodbye." 2 days later, she returned, not with fanfare, not even with an explanation, just her duffel bag, her coat, and Owen's letter pressed to her chest. She didn't go to the garage right away. Instead, she walked to the lake. It was frozen now, the surface a glassy sheet that reflected the soft afternoon light. A wooden bench sat near the shoreline, dusted with snow. She sat there for a long time, her breath visible in the still air, and then she heard footsteps. Turning, she saw Bidou. Ben. Standing a few yards away, his hands in the pockets of his jacket, shoulders tense. They didn't speak right away. It was Ellie who broke the silence. "I read the letter," she said. He nodded once. "He asked me to mail it, said it had to reach you in person. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Ben said quietly. "Not yet." She looked down at her boots. "I left because I was scared, not just of your past, but of what it meant to feel safe again. I haven't trusted that feeling in a long time." "I know," he said. "I've lived it." She looked up, her eyes shining. "Do you still want me here?" Ben took a step forward, then another. "I never stopped," he said, "but it has to be your choice." Ellie let out a slow breath. "Then maybe I can start by making dinner." Ben smiled, something soft and familiar returning to his face. "Owen will be thrilled. He's been surviving on grilled cheese and toaster waffles." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. That night, Ellie stood in the kitchen, stirring soup on the stove. The garage was warm again, full of the low hum of life. Owen sat at the table, coloring. Ben fixed a drawer that didn't need fixing. And Ellie? She didn't feel like a guest anymore. She felt like part of the noise, part of the space, part of the healing. Snow fell in delicate spirals over Harbor Creek's town square, dusting rooftops and pine wreaths with shimmering softness. Strings of white and golden lights wound their way through branches and lampposts, casting a warm glow over bundled-up children, steaming cocoa stands, and neighbors greeting each other like family. It was the annual winter gathering. A quieter cousin to the Festival of Light, meant more for townspeople than tourists. But to Ellie, standing at the edge of the gathering circle with her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets, it felt like something more, a chance to try again. She hadn't told Ben she'd signed up to speak. Gracie had cornered her the day before, in the bakery with a clipboard and the kind of warm insistence that brooked no refusal. 5 minutes, she'd said, shoving a slip of paper into Ellie's hand. Say something honest. That's all anyone really wants this time of year. Now, Ellie's heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to run before her. A small stage had been built in front of the town library. Simple wooden planks, a backdrop of pine, and a microphone that popped every time someone exhaled too hard. The mayor finished her remarks, a few people clapped politely, and then Gracie stepped forward. "Our next speaker," she said, her voice, projecting more than her frame suggested possible, "is someone who came to us unexpected, but reminded us what a new beginning can look like. Ellie Monroe, everyone." There was a soft hush, a few curious murmurs. Ben, standing beside Owen near the fire pit, straightened. Ellie climbed the 3 short steps and took the mic, her breath visible in the cold. She looked out over the crowd. Dozens of faces, warm scarves, expectant eyes, and for a moment her throat closed. Then she saw Owen. His hand slipped into Ben's, and she began. "I didn't plan to stay in Harbour Creek," she said, voice steady, though her hands trembled. "Truth be told, I didn't plan much of anything. I came here because I was lost. Not the kind of lost a map can fix, the other kind. The kind that lives inside you when the life you were building falls apart." A pause. No one moved. "I had worked hard for a future I thought I wanted, a future I thought I earned, but I trusted the wrong people. And when it all fell away, my job, my relationship, my sense of worth, I didn't know who I was without it." She let the silence settle. A few people nodded, and then I broke down. "Right here in your town. My car gave out, and so did I. But instead of judgment, I was offered hot cocoa and a warm room, and space to be something other than broken." A soft laugh rippled through the audience. I didn't expect kindness, and I certainly didn't expect it to be the thing that would begin to put me back together. But that's what this town does, what people like Ben Harper do. Her eyes flicked toward him. He stood very still. He didn't ask me for anything. He just gave. Time, space, quiet, a place to remember who I might still be. She drew in a breath, voice catching. "I know not everyone here knows my story, but I want to thank you for not needing to, for letting me find my place anyway. I'm not perfect. I still have a lot to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm doing it alone." She paused, then added softly, "And I hope that someday, someone else who's lost might find their way here too, because if they do, I know they'll be found." Applause rose, not loud but long, as though the town understood exactly what had just been offered to them, not a speech, but a piece of someone's truth. Later, as Ellie stepped off the stage, she felt a hand gently close around hers. "Ben, you didn't have to say any of that," he said quietly. "I wanted to," she replied, eyes meeting his. "I needed to." They walked a few steps away from the crowd, toward the edge of the lake, where the lights reflected off the glassy ice in ripples of gold. "You were brave," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. He smiled. "That's usually how bravery works." She turned to face him fully. "Ben, I know I hurt you. When I left, I didn't know how to stay when everything felt uncertain. I wasn't sure if what I felt was real or just comfort." "And now?" he asked gently. She took a breath. "Now, I know it's both, and I think that's okay. I think maybe that's how love starts." He studied her face for a moment. "Is that what this is?" "I don't know if it's all the way there," she said honestly. "But it's more than I've felt in a long time, and it's honest. I think that matters most. Ben didn't answer with words. He reached out, brushing a snowflake from her cheek, and for the first time since Evelyn, he allowed himself to hope. That night, as the town dispersed, Ellie stood beside Ben and Owen by the fire pit, holding a cup of cider and listening to the soft hum of a community that had become, quietly, unexpectedly, hers. She wasn't healed, but she was healing, and she was home. The email came on a Tuesday morning. Ellie was at the small desk in the back of the library, labeling returned books and sipping lukewarm tea when the notification chimed. She opened it absent-mindedly, expecting a shipping receipt or town newsletter. Instead, it read, "Ellie, we heard you've been off the grid. I hope you're well. We've missed your fire, your insight, and your gift for bringing people together. We're building something new, bigger than before, and we want you at the table. Lead strategist, Chicago-based, full salary plus equity. Name your terms. You don't owe us a yes, but you deserve to know the door is open. Caleb Whitmore, Westridge Ventures." Her hand went still on the keyboard. Westridge was one of the fastest-growing venture firms in the Midwest. Caleb was a name she hadn't heard in over a year, since the scandal, since she disappeared. And yet here he was, offering a fresh start, a new chance, and a salary that could erase years of struggle. The world she had left behind had come looking for her. She walked home that afternoon in a daze, boots crunching the snow-covered sidewalk. The words looping in her mind, like a record stuck on repeat. Name your terms, full salary, lead strategist. By the time she reached the garage, the sun had dipped low, casting the sky in a soft, violet glow. Inside, Ben was fixing a snowblower for one of the neighbors. Owen sat nearby, painting something on a scrap of wood. Concentrated, tongue poking from the side of his mouth. Ellie watched them quietly for a moment, heart aching with indecision. Could she really give this up? Could she really stay? That evening, after Owen had gone to bed, Ellie sat across from Ben at the kitchen table, her laptop open but untouched. "I got a job offer," she said. Ben looked up. "In town?" She shook her head. "Chicago." He didn't speak. "They want me back. Not just as a staffer, leading a team, equity stake, creative control, everything I thought I wanted." Ben's voice was quiet. "And what do you want now?" That was the question, wasn't it? "I don't know," she said truthfully. "I thought I did. I thought if I could prove I was still valuable, still sharp, that maybe I could reclaim something I lost. But now—" She looked down at her hands, her voice softening. "Now I'm scared that if I say yes, I'll lose something I didn't. No, I needed." Ben reached across the table, his hand warm over hers. "You don't owe anyone the version of you that broke to please them." She met his eyes, full of gentle clarity. "I wish I'd met you before," she whispered. He shook his head. "You met me exactly when you were meant to." The next morning, Ellie stood at the lake, the surface frozen and quiet. The letter from Westridge was printed and folded in her coat pocket, heavy like a stone. She watched the wind scatter loose snow across the ice and thought about what she'd built in Harbor Creek. It wasn't a career, it wasn't a resume bullet point, it was something softer, something real. She thought about Owen and how he always asked people, "Where would you live if you could live anywhere in the world?" And she heard her answer, clear as the wind through the pines. "Here. Not because it's perfect, but because I don't have to be." That night she found Ben in the garage, packing up tools. "I turned them down," she said. He looked up slowly. "Chicago?" She nodded. "They offered me everything I thought I wanted, and I realized I didn't want it anymore." He set the wrench down and crossed the room in a few steps. "Why?" he asked. She took a breath. "Because I'm already doing something that matters. Not out there. Here, I'm helping rebuild lives, including my own. I'm not running anymore. I'm choosing. Ben searched her face. Are you sure? Ellie smiled, the kind of smile that came from knowing, not hoping. Absolutely. He exhaled slowly, relief softening every line in his face. And then she added, half laughing, half serious, also, Owen would kill me if I left again. Later that night, they sat in front of the fireplace. Owen was sprawled on the rug, sketching a design for what he swore would be the world's first solar-powered snowmobile. Ben turned to Ellie. What now? He asked. We build something, she said. Together. Like what? She looked at him, eyes shining. A scholarship fund for people starting over, for people like me. He nodded slowly. We'll call it something that matters. Ellie smiled. We already are. Spring arrived late in Harbour Creek, as if the town wasn't quite ready to let go of its snowy hush. But when it came, it did so gently, with shy crocuses pushing through thawed earth and the soft murmur of birds returning to their familiar branches. The lake, once a mirror of ice, now shimmered in motion again. And just beyond it, beneath the old maple tree that had stood for decades without fanfare or fuss, Ellie sat on a wooden bench that faced the water. In her lap was a folder. Inside, the finalized paperwork for the Kindness Fund. The community scholarship project she and Ben had quietly developed over the last 2 months. It wasn't flashy, but it was personal. It would help single parents, late bloomers, and those who'd been knocked sideways by life and were brave enough to start again. People like her. Still nervous? Ben asked, his voice soft behind her. She smiled without turning around. Only a little. He sat beside her, brushing his shoulder against hers like he'd been doing it his whole life. There's something about putting your name on something that makes it real, Ellie said. And terrifying, Ben chuckled. You put your heart in it. That's what makes it brave. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sunlight dance on the surface of the lake. It had become their rhythm, this quiet, not something to fill, but something to trust. Then Ben reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a simple, smooth ring, silver with a delicate engraving on the inside. He didn't kneel. He didn't launch into a speech. He just turned to her, voice low and even. I don't need a wedding tomorrow, he said, or a grand plan, but I know this much. I want to build every ordinary day with you. I want to cook strange pancakes with you and fix things that don't need fixing and wake up knowing you're nearby. Ellie stared at him, breath caught in her chest. He continued, this ring doesn't mean perfect. It doesn't mean forever without bumps. It just means yes to the messy, beautiful, real thing we're building here. She blinked. Tears. Rising, smiled, trembling. You once asked me if what we had was real, she said. Ben nodded. She took his hand. It is. It's the most real thing I've ever known. Then, with no crowd to cheer and no camera to capture it, she slipped the ring on her finger and kissed him, slow, certain, sure. Later that afternoon, Owen burst into the kitchen carrying a beat-up wooden sign he'd painted himself. It's ready. He beamed, placing it proudly on the table. In thick, slightly uneven letters, it read, Harbour Creek, a place to begin again. Ben raised an eyebrow. That sounds suspiciously like a town motto. It is now, Owen said. And it's going right under the welcome sign. Ellie laughed, tousling his hair. I like it. Owen looked between the two of them. Does this mean we're officially a team? Ben and Ellie exchanged a glance. Yeah, Ben said, his voice quiet. Yeah, it does. That evening, as twilight settled over the town, Ellie stepped out onto the porch with her journal in hand. She flipped to the last page and began to write. This isn't the story I thought I'd tell. It's softer, slower, stitched together with kindness instead of ambition. It's a story that began in the middle of winter, when everything felt broken, And it's ending. No, continuing now, with spring, with healing, with love. I thought I had to rebuild the life I lost. But maybe I was meant to build something new. She closed the journal, pressed it to her chest, and breathed in the clean, pine-sweet air of Harbor Creek. In the distance, laughter floated. Down the street, mingled with the smell of fresh bread from Gracie's bakery. The world didn't feel small anymore. It felt full. The Kusha Kindness Fund had sent 7 adults back to school, helped 4 single parents secure housing, and quietly sponsored holiday meals for families that had fallen on hard times. Ellie and Ben never made speeches about it. They just showed up, at the church, at the food drive, at the garage. Owen was now 11 and obsessed with mechanical design. He'd built a snowplow attachment for his bike, which didn't exactly work. But in Harbor Creek, trying had always mattered more than succeeding. And Ellie? She'd found not just a town, or a partner, or a second chance. She'd found herself again. Not the polished, calculating woman who once believed her worth was tied to performance, but the woman who listened, who stayed, who chose love, even when it felt uncertain. Sometimes the greatest wealth isn't in what we own, but in who we become when someone finally sees us and lets us stay just as we are. I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how stories like this can connect us across towns, states, and even oceans. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, consider subscribing to the channel. We share stories that remind us all of the goodness still left in the world, one chapter at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Your presence here truly means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.